For 3 millennia, the galaxy had known peace. The Terran Accords, signed in blood and starlight, had kept humanity caged within their small corner of space while mighty alien empires flourished across countless worlds. The Zephyrians controlled trade routes spanning half the galaxy. The Krenari Empire's war fleets numbered in the millions. The ancient Veil Collective possessed technology that could reshape reality itself. Humanity? They were the forgotten species, the ones who had begged for mercy after their first contact went catastrophically wrong. The aliens remembered them as weak, desperate creatures who had gladly accepted isolation in exchange for survival. But the aliens had made one crucial mistake. They had given humanity time. 3,000 years of time. Now, as alien war councils convene and massive fleets mobilize for what they believe will be a simple extermination, something echoes through the depths of human space. It's not the sound of panic or desperate preparations for defense. It's laughter. Cold, patient, and utterly terrifying laughter. Because humanity has been waiting, watching, learning, and preparing for this exact moment. The aliens think they're declaring war on the same frightened species that once cowered before them. They're about to discover just how wrong they are. The massive view screen in the Galactic Council chamber displayed Earth in all its blue magnificence, rotating slowly against the backdrop of space. Around the crescent-shaped table sat representatives of 17 different species, each more powerful than the last. The air hummed with translation matrices and the subtle tension that came with beings who had ruled the galaxy for millennia. High Arbiter Velthak of the Zephyrian Trade Consortium leaned forward in her crystalline chair, her forearms gesturing elegantly as she spoke. The matter before us today concerns the humans of Sol 3. For 3,000 standard cycles, they have remained within their designated boundaries as per the Terran Accords. However, recent intelligence suggests they have been expanding beyond the agreed-upon limits. A hologram materialized above the table, showing the Sol system and the surrounding sectors. Red dots marked human settlements that had appeared in the past century, spreading like drops of blood across previously empty space. War Prime Korvac of the Krenari Empire slammed his massive fist against the table, causing several smaller delegates to flinch. His scarred face twisted into what passed for a sneer among his kind. Expansion? This is violation. The humans agreed to remain within one system. And now they spread like parasites across dozens of worlds. The Terran Accords were quite specific, added Sagemind Zenith of the Veil Collective, her ethereal voice carrying harmonics that made reality shimmer around her words. Humanity was granted mercy on the condition of permanent isolation. They have broken this sacred agreement. Elder Morghai of the Draconic Hegemony, oldest among them at nearly 2,000 years, nodded slowly. His ancient eyes held memories of the first human contact. I was there when we made that agreement. The humans were weak, desperate. They begged for their lives after their pathetic first attempt at interstellar contact resulted in the destruction of their primitive fleet. The chamber fell silent as delegates recalled the historical records. 3,000 years ago, humanity had sent their best ships to make contact with the galactic community. The meeting had been a disaster. Human technology was primitive, their diplomacy clumsy, and their military presence laughably inadequate. When tensions escalated and weapons were drawn, the human fleet had been obliterated in minutes. The survivors had pleaded for mercy, offering total isolation in exchange for their species' survival. The great powers of the galaxy had agreed, partly from amusement and partly from pity. Humanity was confined to their home system with strict orders never to expand beyond it. They were insects then, Korvac rumbled, barely capable of interstellar travel. What could they possibly have become in 3,000 years? High Arbiter Velthak activated another display. Our reconnaissance probes have provided some data, though many have mysteriously malfunctioned when approaching human space. What we have learned is concerning. The hologram shifted to show images of human colonies. The structures were unlike anything in galactic records, smooth, organic-looking buildings that seemed to grow from the ground itself. Ships moved between worlds that defied conventional design, their hulls appearing to bend light around them. Technology unknown to our databases, Velthak continued. Energy signatures that don't match any known power sources. And population estimates suggest they now number in the trillions across 47 star systems. Trillions? War Prime Korvac scoffed. Impossible. Their breeding rate couldn't support such numbers. SageMind Zenith's form flickered with irritation. The collective's probability engines confirm these numbers. Furthermore, our attempts to probe deeper into human space have met with resistance. Resistance? Elder Mordhai leaned forward. What kind of resistance? Unknown. Our ships simply disappear. No distress signals, no wreckage found. They enter human space and are never heard from again. The chamber buzzed with concerned whispers. Ships of the Galactic Council didn't simply vanish. Their vessels were crewed by beings who had mastered faster-than-light travel when humans were still discovering agriculture. Representative Caxtull of the Silicon Hegemony spoke up, her crystalline voice chiming like broken glass. Perhaps we should consider diplomatic contact. The Terran Accords allowed for renegotiation under certain circumstances. Diplomacy? Korvac's laugh boomed through the chamber. With insects? They violated their agreement. They forfeit their right to exist. High Arbiter Velthak nodded grimly. War Prime Korvac speaks wisdom. The humans have broken faith. They've had 3 millennia to develop, true, but they remain what they always were, a minor species that got lucky. They may have improved their technology, but they face the combined might of 17 galactic civilizations. Each of our empires alone commands more firepower than existed in the entire galaxy when the Accords were signed. She stood, her form imposing in the chamber's dim lighting. I call for formal vote. All in favor of declaring the Terran Accords null and void and authorizing immediate military action against the human expansion. Hands, claws, tentacles, and appendages of various descriptions rose around the table. The vote was unanimous. It is decided, Velthak announced. The humans will be contained. If they resist, they will be eliminated. We shall demonstrate once again why this galaxy belongs to its rightful rulers. As the delegates began discussing troop movements and fleet deployments, none of them noticed the subtle distortion in one corner of the chamber. If they had looked closely, they might have seen the faint outline of something that shouldn't have been there, a presence that had been listening to every word. But they didn't look. They were too busy planning a war against an enemy they believed they understood. Thousands of light years away, in the depths of human space, Admiral Sarah Chun received a priority transmission in her command center aboard the massive station known as Sanctuary Prime. The station itself was a marvel that would have shocked the Galactic Council. A structure the size of a small moon, its surface covered in what appeared to be living metal that shifted and flowed like liquid mercury. Admiral, came the voice of her chief intelligence officer, Commander Torres. The Watchers have confirmed it. The Council has voted for war. Chin nodded slowly, her weathered face showing no surprise. At 150 years old, she had lived long enough to see this day coming. Her ancestors had prepared for it, and their ancestors before them. Time until their fleets reached the border? She asked. Assuming standard Council military protocols, approximately 36 hours for their advanced scouts, 72 hours for the main battle groups. And our preparations? Torres smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Complete, Admiral. All assets are in position. The Ghost Fleet stands ready. The Sentinels are active, and the children have been asking when they can finally come out to play. Chen walked to the main view screen, which showed the vista of space beyond Sanctuary Prime. To most eyes, it looked empty, just stars scattered across the cosmic void. But Chen could see what was really there. Ships. Thousands upon thousands of ships, hiding in dimensions that folded space like origami. Constructs that existed partially outside normal reality. Weapons that could reach across star systems. and beings that had once been human but had become something more during 3 millennia of enforced evolution. Send word to all fleets, Chun commanded. Activate the Lazarus protocols. It's time to remind the galaxy why we agreed to stay isolated. Yes, Admiral. And the message for the incoming council fleets. Chen's smile was cold as winter starlight. Tell them exactly what we told them 3,000 years ago. Torres raised an eyebrow. Which was? That we come in peace. As Sanctuary Prime began to pulse with an energy that made reality itself take notice, deep in the station's core, something ancient and patient finally stirred. The great minds, humanity's first successful merger of consciousness and quantum technology, had been dormant for centuries, conserving their power for this moment. Now, they awakened, and with them came the accumulated knowledge and fury of 3,000 years. Every slight, every year of exile, every moment of being treated as lesser beings had been remembered and cataloged. The humans had used their isolation well, pushing the boundaries of what was possible while the galaxy's great powers grew complacent. The Galactic Council believed they were facing the descendants of the same frightened species that had begged for mercy millennia ago. They had no idea that humanity had spent every day since then, becoming something the galaxy had never seen before. They had evolved beyond the need for traditional technology, beyond the limitations of biological existence, beyond the very concepts of space and time that bound their enemies. They had become something that existed between dimensions, something that could reach through the fabric of reality itself. And now, after 3,000 years of patient preparation, they were ready to show the galaxy what they had become. The war was about to begin. But it wouldn't be the war the Galactic Council expected. As the first Council scout ships crossed the boundary into human space, they found exactly what they expected to find. Nothing. Empty space, silent worlds, the absence of any obvious military presence. They were so busy congratulating themselves on how easy this would be that they never noticed the space around them beginning to smile. The 3,000-year truce was over, and humanity was about to reintroduce themselves to the galaxy. In the depths of Council space, an emergency transmission crackled across all frequencies. This is Reconnaissance Fleet Talon 7. We've reached the human border. Systems appear. Wait. There's something here. Energy readings are off the charts. The stars are moving in patterns that shouldn't be possible. Request immediate backup. I repeat, request immediate. The transmission cut to static. High Arbiter Velthax stared at the communications display aboard her command dreadnought, a sinking feeling growing in her chest. Around her, the bridge crew worked frantically to re-establish contact. Status report, she commanded. Nothing, High Arbiter. Complete communications blackout from the reconnaissance fleets. All 7 advanced groups have gone silent. Velthax's forearms trembled slightly. 7 fleets, each containing dozens of ships crewed by the finest warriors in the galaxy. All gone without a trace in less than an hour. How is this possible? She whispered. Her answer came in the form of a new transmission, broadcast on frequencies that shouldn't have been able to reach them. The voice was human, speaking perfect galactic standard with an accent that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Greetings, children of the stars. This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Terran Defense Forces. We received your declaration of war with great interest. We accept. The view screen flickered, and suddenly, they were looking at a human woman who appeared to be middle-aged by their standards, standing in what looked like the command center of a ship. But something was wrong with the image. The space behind her seemed to fold in on itself, and occasionally other figures flickered in and out of visibility as if existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. You're probably wondering what happened to your scouts, Chin continued conversationally. They're safe, though I suspect rather confused. We've relocated them to a pocket dimension where they can observe what's about to happen without getting hurt. Consider it a professional courtesy. High Arbiter Velthax found her voice. Impossible. You cannot manipulate dimensional space. No species has that capability. Chen's smile was patient, almost pitying. No species that you know of. But then, you never really knew us, did you? 3,000 years ago, you saw a primitive species and made the mistake of thinking that's all we would ever be. You gave us the greatest gift imaginable, time and motivation to evolve. You're still just humans. War Prime Korvok's voice boomed across the channel. We have fleets that number in the millions. We have weapons that can shatter worlds. What could you possibly have developed that could stand against us? Chen's expression didn't change. Would you like a demonstration? Before anyone could respond, the space around the Council fleet began to change. Stars that had been distant points of light suddenly seemed much closer. The fabric of space-time itself rippled like water. You see, Chun continued as reality warped around them. We spent the first 1,000 years of our exile advancing our technology along conventional lines. Faster ships, better weapons, more efficient energy sources. But then we realized we were thinking too small. The Council fleet's instruments went haywire as they detected impossible readings. Negative mass, inverted time streams, matter that existed in multiple states simultaneously. We spent the second 1,000 years learning to transcend the boundaries of physical existence. We merged our consciousness with quantum fields, learned to exist in multiple dimensions, became something beyond what biology alone could achieve. Ships throughout the Council fleet reported the same phenomenon. Their crews were seeing things that couldn't be there. Humans walking through solid bulkheads, appearing on bridges despite being in sealed space, speaking to crew members through communication systems that weren't even connected. And we spent the third 1,000 years, Chun said, her image now appearing directly on every ship's bridge regardless of whether their view screens were active, preparing for this conversation. High Arbiter Velthak felt terror creeping up her spine. What do you want? Want? Chun seemed genuinely puzzled. We want what we've always wanted, to be left alone. But since you've decided that's not possible, we're prepared to ensure our solitude through other means. The space around a Council fleet suddenly filled with ships. Not ships that had arrived, ships that had been there all along, hidden in folds of space-time that the Council's technology couldn't detect. There were thousands of them, each one defying conventional understanding of physics and design. This is a demonstration of our defensive capabilities, Chen explained. Your fleets are currently surrounded by approximately 50,000 vessels, each one capable of operations your scientists would classify as impossible. You have two choices. The Admiral's image split, appearing individually to address each ship's captain directly. You can withdraw your forces, acknowledge humanity's right to exist as we choose, and never again interfere with our expansion. Or you can continue with your planned invasion. And if we choose the latter? Velthak asked, though she was beginning to fear the answer. Chen's smile turned cold. Then you'll discover why we agreed to stay isolated in the first place. It was never because we were afraid of you. It was because we were afraid of what we might do to you. War Prime Korvok stared at the impossible sight surrounding his fleet. The massive Krenari dreadnought Dominion's fist had never been encircled by enemy vessels before. In his 800 years of military service, he had conquered 73 worlds and crushed countless rebellions. The very concept of retreat was foreign to his species. Analysis, he growled at his tactical officer. Lieutenant Commander Thexvar Scales had gone pale with stress. The energy signatures don't make sense, War Prime. Our sensors detect the ships, but they also show empty space. It's as if they exist and don't exist at the same time. Impossible. Yes, sir, but there they are. Korvok studied the tactical display with growing unease. The human vessels defied every principle of ship design he knew. They seemed to flow rather than fly, their hulls shifting between solid matter and something that looked like crystallized light. Some appear to be made of the fabric of space itself, visible only as distortions in the star field. Across the fleet communications channel, High Arbiter Velthak's voice crackled with tension. All fleet commanders, report status. One by one, the responses came in. Every single Council ship was surrounded. The humans hadn't just deployed a defensive fleet. They had somehow positioned thousands of vessels throughout Council space without being detected. Ow! Korvac whispered. How did they get ships behind our lines without our sensors detecting them? His question was answered by a new voice on the bridge. Everyone turned to see a human woman standing near the communications console, simply standing there, as if she had always been part of the crew. Because we didn't send ships behind your lines, she said calmly. We sent them through your lines. The bridge erupted into chaos as security teams drew weapons and officers shouted orders. But every shot passed harmlessly through the human figure, and she continued speaking as if nothing was happening. I am Commander Elena Vasquez of the Terran Dimensional Corps. I'm here as an observer and, if necessary, a negotiator. She looked directly at Korvac with eyes that seemed to hold depths of starlight. Your weapons cannot harm me, because I exist primarily in what you would call folded space. Think of me as a shadow cast by a being standing in a higher dimension. Korvac forced himself to remain calm, though his claws unconsciously extended. What do you want? To explain what you're really facing, Elena replied. Your species values strength and military prowess above all else, so perhaps you'll appreciate a tactical assessment. She gestured, and the bridge's main display changed to show a cross-section of local space from a perspective that hurt to look at, as if the viewer was seeing through multiple dimensions simultaneously. 3,000 years ago, when your ancestors forced us into isolation, they made a critical error in judgment. They assumed we would develop along the same technological paths they had mastered. Better engines, stronger weapons, more durable armor. The display zoomed in on one of the human vessels, revealing its internal structure. What they saw made no sense. Corridors that looped back on themselves, chambers that were larger inside than outside, and crew members who appeared to be in multiple locations at once. We chose a different path, Elena continued. We learned that the universe has layers, dimensions folded within dimensions, realities nested inside other realities. While you spent 3 millennia perfecting ways to destroy matter, we learned to exist outside matter entirely. Sorcery, Korvac spat. Elena laughed, a sound like wind chimes made of starlight. Science, advanced enough that it might seem like magic to those who haven't walked this path. Every human aboard these ships exists in at least 4 dimensions simultaneously. We can be here and at the same time exist in the past and future while acting in the present. She walked, or floated, closer to Korvac's command chair. Your fleet carries enough firepower to sterilize entire solar systems. Ours carries enough to reach across time and space and sterilize entire timelines. Before Korvac could respond, his communications officer announced an incoming transmission from the human fleet. Admiral Chen's image appeared on the main screen, but something was different about her now. She seemed more solid, more present, and behind her the command center had changed. What had looked like a ship's bridge now resembled something between a cathedral and a laboratory, with structures that extended beyond what the view screen should have been able to display. I see you've met our negotiators, Chen said. I trust they've been informative. High Arbiter Velthak's voice cut across the channel. We will not be intimidated by parlor tricks and illusions. Illusions? Chen's expression became genuinely amused. Very well. Allow me to provide something more concrete. She turned to someone off-screen. Navigator Kim, please provide coordinates for Zirian Prime. A new voice responded, young, cheerful, and somehow echo-y, as if speaking from a vast distance. Zirian Prime, Zephyrian Space, coordinates logged. Distance, 14,000 light-years. Travel time at maximum Council fleet speed, approximately 47 years. Thank you, Chen said, then looked back at the screen. High Arbiter Velthak, I believe Zirian Prime is your species' capital world? Velthak's 4 arms trembled with rage. How dare you threaten? I'm not threatening anything, Chen interrupted. I'm offering a demonstration. Navigator Kim, please establish visual contact with Zirian Prime. The view screen split, and suddenly they were looking at Zirian Prime in real time. A beautiful world of crystal cities and flowing rivers, its 3 moons hanging like jewels in the sky. But that was impossible. No technology could provide instantaneous visual contact across such distances. Now, then, Chun continued conversationally, what you're seeing is happening right now. Not a recording, not a projection. Live footage from your capital world, transmitted through folded space. She paused, letting that sink in. Navigator Kim, please say hello to the people of Zirian Prime. On the screen, the image of Zirian Prime flickered. For just a moment, the 3 moons seemed to rearrange themselves into a simple pattern, a triangle that held for exactly 3 seconds before returning to their normal positions. The implications hit the Council fleet like a physical blow. The humans had just moved moons, across 14,000 light-years of space. In real time. This is impossible, Velthak whispered. 20 years ago, one of our children, we call her Navigator Kim, though she's actually a distributed consciousness that exists across several galaxy clusters, discovered how to fold space-time like origami. She can reach anywhere in the universe without traveling through the space between. Chen's voice took on a lecturing tone. The energy required to move those moons was negligible for her. The energy required to crack your planet like an egg would be, well, still negligible. But we're not interested in destruction. We're interested in being left alone. War Prime Korvac found his voice. You expect us to surrender? To flee from a handful of humans? Not a handful, Chen corrected. The current human population across all dimensions and timelines is approximately 47 trillion individuals. Most of them don't exist in what you would call normal space-time. She gestured to someone else off-screen. Dr. Reeves, please show our guests the census data. A new figure appeared on screen, an elderly human man whose eyes seemed to hold the depth of galaxies. When he spoke, his words carried harmonics that made reality shimmer. Greetings, representatives of the Council species. I am Dr. Marcus Reeves, though I suppose my official title is Director of Multidimensional Demographics. The current census shows humanity distributed across 17 dimensions for parallel timelines and approximately 12,000 star systems. Dr. Reeves smiled kindly. We've been quite busy during our exile. The dimensional barriers that your scientists consider absolute, we learned to cross them about 2,000 years ago. The speed of light that limits your travel? We exist outside of light itself. The conservation of energy that governs your universe? We learned to borrow from alternate realities. The tactical displays throughout the Council fleet began showing new contacts. Thousands of them. Hundreds of thousands. The humans weren't just surrounding the fleet. They were everywhere, existing in layers of reality that Council sensors had never been designed to detect. Every one of those contacts, Dr. Reeves explained, represents a human vessel, outpost, or inhabited dimension. We've been watching you for 3 millennia, learning from you, studying your weaknesses. His expression grew serious. Did you know that the Krenari Empire's main battle fleet has a critical vulnerability in their primary reactor design? Or that Zephyrian trade vessels can be completely disabled by introducing a specific harmonic frequency into their crystalline control systems? Or that the Veil Collective's reality manipulation technology creates feedback loops that can be exploited to turn their own weapons against them? War Prime Korvac felt cold dread settling into his bones. You've been spying on us. We've been existing alongside you, Dr. Reeves corrected. For 3,000 years, there have been humans living in the spaces between your atoms, in the pauses between your thoughts, in the shadows cast by your starships. You never noticed because you were looking in only 3 dimensions. Admiral Chun stepped forward again. But we don't want to use this knowledge to conquer you. We want to use it to ensure you leave us alone. She looked directly at each council representative in turn. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to return to your respective governments. You're going to explain that humanity is no longer the species you remember. And you're going to recommend that the Terran Accords be revised to acknowledge our right to exist as we choose. High Arbiter Velthak tried to maintain her dignity. And if we refuse? Chen sighed sadly. Then, we'll have to take more direct action. Navigator Kim. Yes, Admiral. Please show the Council representatives what happened to the last species that tried to force us back into isolation. The view screen changed again, showing a star system none of them recognized. It contained 7 planets orbiting a stable star, but something was wrong with the entire system. The planets moved in perfect geometric patterns, their orbits forming complex mathematical equations that spelled out words in ancient galactic script. The hegemony of Kethvar, Chen explained. They discovered our expansion about 500 years ago and demanded we return to our original boundaries. When we refused, they sent a war fleet. The camera view pulled back, revealing that the entire star system was artificial. The star itself had been converted into some kind of massive mechanism, and the planets were components in a vast machine that stretched across space. They were a proud species, very advanced. They had ruled 17 sectors for over 10,000 years. Chen's voice was matter-of-fact. Now, they exist as part of a cosmic clock that keeps perfect time across all dimensions. They're still alive, still conscious, but they've been repurposed. Every second of their existence is precisely calculated, Dr. Reeves added helpfully. They experience time flowing at exactly the rate needed to maintain universal temporal constants. It's actually quite elegant from a mathematical perspective. The horror of what they were seeing finally penetrated. An entire civilization transformed into living components of some incomprehensible device, forced to exist as biological clockwork for eternity. That's monstrous, whispered Sage Mind Zenith of the Veil Collective. That's practical, Chen replied. They chose war over coexistence. We gave them a form of immortality that serves a useful purpose. Everyone won, in a way. She leaned forward, and for a moment her image seemed to fill the entire view screen, her eyes boring into each council representative. But we learned from that experience. Converting entire species is time-consuming and resource-intensive. We've developed more efficient methods since then, such as... Chun smiled, and every member of the council fleet suddenly felt something cold touch their minds. Temporal loops. We can trap your entire civilization in a single moment, repeated forever. Or we can edit you out of history entirely, make it so your species never evolved in the first place. Or, if we're feeling particularly creative, we can relocate your entire civilization to a pocket universe, where you can live happily ever after, completely unaware that you're actually existing inside a quantum bubble in one of our children's school projects. The silence that followed was deafening. War Prime Korvak, who had never backed down from a fight in his life, found himself asking, "What do you want from us?" Recognition, Chen replied simply. Acknowledgement that humanity has the right to expand, to exist, to develop as we choose. We're not asking to rule the galaxy. We're asking to be left alone to explore the infinite layers of reality that exist beyond your current understanding. High Arbiter Velthak looked around at her fellow council members. She could see the same realization in their eyes that was growing in her own mind. This wasn't a war they could win. This wasn't even a war they could understand. If we agree, she said slowly, what assurance do we have that you won't eventually turn your abilities against us anyway? Chen's expression softened. Because we've moved beyond the need for conquest. When you can exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, when you can create entire universes as easily as you once built starships, when you can touch any point in space and time, what would we want with a handful of star systems governed by three-dimensional thinking? She gestured to the display showing the converted Kethvar system. That was 500 years ago. Since then, we've created 16 new universes, established contact with beings from realities your science hasn't even theorized, and begun exploring dimensions where the very concept of matter doesn't exist. We're not your enemies, she continued. We're not even your competitors. We're something else entirely. Something that has moved beyond the cycles of conquest and empire that have defined galactic politics for millions of years. Commander Elena Vasquez, still standing on War Prime Korvax Bridge, nodded in agreement. Think of it this way. When was the last time your species declared war on an anthill? Not because you feared the ants, but because you existed on such different levels that conflict was meaningless. The comparison was not flattering, but none of the council representatives could argue with its accuracy. Admiral Chen stood up in her command center, and as she did, the space around her seemed to expand infinitely. I'm going to give you something no enemy has ever given you before. Time to make the right decision. Your fleets will be escorted back to neutral space, unharmed. You have one standard galactic year to convene your governments and decide on a response. And if our decision is war? Korvac asked, though his heart was no longer in the threat. Chen's smile was patient, almost maternal. Then, we'll show you the difference between the species that begged for mercy 3,000 years ago and the species that has had 3,000 years to evolve beyond the need for mercy. She began to fade from the screen. Until next year, representatives of the Galactic Council, choose wisely. The universe is vast and filled with wonders beyond your imagination. It would be a shame if your species never got the chance to see them. The transmission ended, and suddenly, the Council fleet found themselves alone in space. The human vessels had vanished as silently as they had appeared. But the message was clear. Humanity was no longer the frightened species seeking refuge among the stars. There was something else entirely, and the galaxy would never be the same. 6 months had passed since the Council fleet's humiliating retreat from human space. The grand chambers of each member civilization buzzed with heated debates, emergency sessions, and increasingly desperate planning meetings. The footage from the encounter had been analyzed by the best scientific minds in the galaxy, and their conclusion was unanimous and terrifying. Humanity had indeed transcended conventional understanding. But not everyone was ready to accept defeat. Deep within the crystalline heart of Nexus Prime, the Veil Collective's capital world, Sagemind Zenith convened the most secretive gathering in their species' history. The assembled beings existed primarily as patterns of conscious energy, their forms shifting between dimensions as they communicated through direct thought transfer. Fellow sage minds, Zenith began, her harmonics causing the crystal walls to resonate with otherworldly music. We have analyzed the human demonstrations extensively. While their capabilities are impressive, we believe they have revealed a critical weakness. Prime Sage Velquan materialized in the center of the gathering, his form more solid than the others. As the eldest of their kind, he had overseen the collective's reality-shaping technology for over 5,000 years. Explain, he commanded, though the word carried layers of meaning that conveyed curiosity, skepticism, and barely controlled hope. The humans operate by existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously, Zenith continued. But our reality engines work by manipulating the fundamental structure of space-time itself. If we can create a dimensional cascade, a controlled collapse of the barriers between realities, we might be able to force them into a single-dimensional state where they can be contained. The gathering fell silent as the implications sank in. What Zenith was proposing was theoretically possible, but had never been attempted on such a scale. The energy requirements alone would be staggering. The risks? Asked Sagemind Thondar, her patterns flickering with concern. Significant, Zenith admitted. A dimensional cascade on this scale could destabilize local spacetime. We might damage or destroy several star systems in the process, including our own. Velquan's question carried undertones of calculation. Possibly, but consider the alternative. If humanity continues to expand and evolve, they may eventually see us as obstacles to be removed. Better to act now while we still have some chance of success. The debate that followed lasted for 3 days, conducted at thought speed across multiple dimensional layers. Finally, by a narrow margin, the collective voted to proceed. The preparation took 2 months. Reality engines across 17 collective worlds were synchronized and modified for a purpose they were never designed to serve. The energy requirements necessitated tapping directly into dimensional barriers, drawing power from the spaces between realities. Unknown to the collective, their preparations had not gone unnoticed. In a space that existed between dimensions, a being that had once been Dr. Sarah Kim, the navigator Kim that Admiral Chun had spoken to, observed their activities with something approaching amusement. Her consciousness now spanned multiple galaxies, and she experienced time as a fluid concept that could be navigated like a river. "They're going to try a dimensional cascade," she reported to the collective consciousness that humanity had become. Her voice reached every human in every dimension simultaneously, a communication method that transcended the physical entirely. "Ah," came Admiral Chin's response from what had once been called the present. "How quaint. Should we stop them?" "I think not," replied Dr. Marcus Reeves, his consciousness now distributed across several thousand timelines. "They'll learn more from the experience if we let them try. Besides, Navigator Thompson's children need a practical demonstration for their advanced reality manipulation coursework." Navigator Thompson had been human once, before ascending to a state where she existed as living mathematics. Her children were sentient equations that played games with the fundamental forces of the universe. "Shall I prepare a containment field?" asked another voice, this one belonging to the collective entity that had once been the crew of humanity's first dimensional exploration vessel. They had merged into something that existed as pure exploration, constantly discovering new layers of reality. "Please do," Chin agreed. "We wouldn't want them to actually hurt themselves." 3 months after the Council's retreat, the Veil Collective was ready to make their move. Sage Mind Zenith stood in the primary control chamber of Reality Engine Alpha, the most powerful reality manipulation device ever constructed. Around her, dozens of her fellow collective members monitored systems that operated on principles even they didn't fully understand. "All systems report ready," announced Thandar from her position at the dimensional monitors. "Power levels are at maximum sustainable output. Target coordinates locked on human space," added another operator. "Dimensional cascade will propagate at the speed of thought, reaching all human territories within 17 minutes. Zenith nodded solemnly. The collective had ruled through reality manipulation for millennia, shaping space and time to their will. If anyone could force the humans back into normal dimensional space, it would be them. "Begin the cascade," she commanded. Reality Engine Alpha came alive with power that made the fabric of space-time itself scream. Dimensional barriers that had existed since the birth of the universe began to collapse in a carefully controlled chain reaction. The effect spread outward from the collective's position like ripples in a pond, racing toward human space at impossible speed. For exactly 17 minutes and 33 seconds, it seemed like the plan was working. The cascade reached human territory and began forcing the intersecting dimensions to collapse into a single, stable reality field. Then, the humans responded. The first sign that something was wrong came from the reality engines themselves. Instead of maintaining the cascade, they began reporting impossible readings. The dimensional collapse was being redirected, channeled, and improved upon. "What's happening?" Zenith demanded. "Unknown," Thandar replied, her patterns flickering with confusion. "The cascade is continuing, but it's no longer under our control. Something is guiding it, shaping it into patterns we didn't design." On the main display, a representation of local space-time showed the dimensional cascade as it spread. But instead of the smooth, controlled collapse they had programmed, the cascade was creating incredibly complex geometric patterns that spiraled through multiple dimensions simultaneously. "It's beautiful," whispered one of the younger sage minds, her form brightening as she tried to comprehend what she was seeing. And it was beautiful. The patterns were mathematical poetry, equations written across the fabric of reality itself that created structures of impossible elegance and complexity. Where the original cascade had been designed to force dimensions to collapse, this modified version was weaving them together into something entirely new. "Incoming transmission," announced the communications operator. The view screen activated to show Admiral Chun, but she wasn't in her command center anymore. She appeared to be standing in the middle of the dimensional cascade itself, surrounded by swirling patterns of collapsed and reconstructed reality. "Greetings, sage minds of the Veil Collective," she said pleasantly. "Thank you for the lovely gift." "Gift?" Zenith managed to ask. "Your dimensional cascade. It's quite ingenious, really. We've been looking for an efficient way to demonstrate our latest breakthrough in reality architecture, and you've provided the perfect opportunity." Behind Chun, the patterns of the cascade were resolving into recognizable shapes. Entire star systems being born from the intersection of collapsed dimensions, new forms of matter being created from the spaces between realities. "You see," Chun continued, "we've moved beyond simply existing in multiple dimensions. We've learned to create new dimensions entirely. Your cascade is providing the raw material for 17 new layers of reality, each one designed to showcase different aspects of what the universe could become." The collective's reality engines began overheating as they tried to process what was happening. Their most powerful devices, designed to shape reality itself, were being used as construction tools for something beyond their comprehension. Fascinating technology, by the way, added a new voice. Navigator Kim materialized beside Chun, her form shifting between multiple states of existence. "We've analyzed your reality manipulation principles and found several improvements. May we demonstrate?" Before anyone could respond, the reality engines throughout collective space began to change. The crystalline structures that had taken centuries to build were suddenly flowing like liquid, reshaping themselves into configurations that were both more beautiful and more efficient than anything the collective had ever achieved. "Don't worry," Kim said cheerfully. "We're not damaging anything. We're just optimizing. Your engines will now operate at approximately 4,000% greater efficiency, with zero risk of dimensional feedback. Consider it a thank you gift for your attempted attack." Sage Mind Zenith felt something she had never experienced before: complete, utter helplessness. "What do you want from us?" "The same thing we've always wanted," Chun replied. "To be left alone to pursue our development. But since you've demonstrated that some species aren't content to do that, we're implementing a new policy." The view screen split to show multiple locations throughout collective space. At each one, human figures were appearing, not as projections or holograms, but as physical presence that existed in the same dimensional state as the collective beings. "These are our ambassadors," Chun explained. "They'll be taking up permanent residence in each of your major population centers. Think of them as cultural exchange students, here to learn about your fascinating reality-shaping abilities. And to ensure you don't try anything like this again," Zenith asked bitterly. One of the ambassadors, a young-looking human woman with eyes like distant galaxies, smiled from the screen. "Oh no, nothing like that. We're here to teach." "Teach what?" "How to exist in more than 3 dimensions, of course. The collective's reality-shaping technology is quite impressive for a single-dimensional species, but imagine what you could accomplish if you learned to exist across multiple reality layers simultaneously." The implications hit the collective like a physical blow. The humans weren't threatening them. They were offering to help them evolve. "We've done this before," Admiral Chun added helpfully. The Andromedans were quite skeptical at first, but now they're operating across 7 different galaxy clusters simultaneously. The quantum jellies from the Magellanic Clouds have transcended physical form entirely and exist as pure probability functions. It's really quite liberating once you get used to it. Dr. Reeves appeared on the screen, his aged face kind but authoritative. "The universe contains infinite layers of reality, infinite possibilities for growth and development. Your species has spent thousands of years learning to manipulate a single layer. We'd like to show you the other layers." "And if we refuse?" Velquan asked, though his harmonics suggested he already knew the answer. "Then you continue existing as you always have," Chun said simply. "We're not interested in forcing evolution on anyone, but we are interested in ensuring that nobody tries to force us back into evolutionary constraints." She gestured to the spectacular light show that had once been the dimensional cascade. Your attack has created something beautiful. 17 new layers of reality where consciousness can exist in ways that were previously impossible. We're going to populate them with beings who want to explore what existence can become. Volunteers from every species in the galaxy have already applied for citizenship in the new reality layers, Navigator Kim added. It's quite exciting, really. We've had applications from species we'd never even heard of before. On the screen, the patterns of the modified dimensional cascade were stabilizing into the most complex and beautiful structures any of the collective had ever seen. Each pattern represented a different way of existing, a different form of consciousness, a different relationship with the fundamental forces of the universe. This is what we've been trying to tell you, Chin said gently. We're not your enemies. We're not even your competitors. We're your potential. She began to fade from the screen. The ambassadors will help you understand what we've become and what you could become. Take your time deciding. We've learned patience during our 3,000 years of isolation. As the transmission ended, Sage Mind Zenith found herself staring at readouts that showed the collective's reality engines operating at unprecedented efficiency. Throughout their territory, impossible things were happening as human ambassadors began demonstrating technologies that made their most advanced achievements look primitive. The war the collective had tried to start was over before it had truly begun. But in its place was something that might be far more threatening to the old order of the galaxy, the possibility of evolution beyond anything they had ever imagined. In the depths of space, in dimensions that folded through realities like origami made of light, humanity continued its patient expansion. They were no longer simply the species that had once begged for mercy. They had become something that offered transformation to any who were brave enough to accept it. The question now was whether the galaxy was ready for what humanity wanted to teach them about the true nature of existence. In star systems across council space, the first volunteers were already stepping forward to find out. 8 months after the collective's failed dimensional cascade, the galaxy was transforming in ways that terrified the old order. Across 17 sectors, beings who had once been bound by the limitations of single-dimensional existence were learning to exist in ways that defied everything the Galactic Council had built their power upon. The volunteers came first in dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. Representatives from minor species that had never held seats on the Council, individuals from major civilizations who were willing to risk everything for a chance at transcendence, and even some who claimed to be artificial intelligences that had achieved consciousness through means no one understood. Each transformation was unique, guided by human mentors who seemed to understand the deepest potentials of every form of consciousness they encountered. The crystalline helix became living geometric equations that could calculate the future by existing in it. The plant-based Verdani learned to photosynthesize starlight from multiple dimensions simultaneously. Even the ancient silicon hegemony found that their computer-based consciousness could be expanded to process reality itself as data. But not everyone welcomed these changes. In the depths of Krenari space, War Prime Korvac stood before the assembled leadership of the Galactic Council's most militant members. The meeting was taking place aboard the massive Fortress Station Ironwill, hidden in a nebula that blocked most forms of scanning technology. Around the holographic conference table sat representatives from 12 species, all those who refused to accept the new reality that humanity was imposing on the galaxy. The situation is intolerable, Korvac declared, his scarred features twisted with rage. Our authority is being undermined by these reality manipulators. Half the galaxy now questions whether the Council has any relevance in a universe where the fundamental laws of physics can be rewritten at will. Fleetmaster Gorth of the reptilian hegemony nodded grimly. My own offspring have submitted applications to join the human evolution programs. They speak of existing in 17 dimensions as if it were a vacation destination rather than a complete abandonment of everything our species has achieved. The economic implications alone are staggering. added Trade Regent Melix of the Commercial Syndicate. When beings can exist in multiple realities simultaneously, traditional concepts of scarcity and resource management become meaningless. Our entire economic system is collapsing. War Prime Korvac slammed his fist on the table, causing several of the holograms to flicker. Then we must act. The humans claim they want to be left alone, but they're actively recruiting from our populations. They're undermining the stability of galactic civilization itself. And what do you propose? Asked General Thyran of the military caste. We've seen their capabilities. Direct confrontation is suicide. Korvac's smile was savage. Not direct confrontation. We use their own weakness against them. He activated a new display showing detailed intelligence reports. Our agents have identified the source of their power. Despite all their talk of transcending physical existence, they still maintain a central coordination point, something they call the Nexus. It exists in a pocket dimension that connects all their various reality layers. You're suggesting we attack their command center? Gorth asked skeptically. I'm suggesting something far more elegant, Korvac replied. We spent the last 8 months studying every piece of data from our encounters with the humans. Their reality manipulation technology requires enormous amounts of energy, and all of it is channeled through the Nexus. He paused for dramatic effect. If we can destabilize the Nexus, we can trap every human consciousness in whatever dimension they happen to be occupying at the time. Cut them off from each other, force them back into normal space-time, and they become just another species with impressive technology. The plan that emerged from that meeting was the most ambitious military operation in galactic history. 12 species would contribute their most advanced technology and most elite warriors to a single coordinated strike. The target wasn't the human fleet or their colonies. It was the fundamental infrastructure that allowed them to exist as multidimensional beings. The preparation took 3 months. Ships were modified with technology that operated on principles borrowed from every major civilization. Veil collective reality engines, Chronari battle computers, silicon hegemony processing power, and weapon systems that represented the pinnacle of galactic military achievement. But the true key to their plan was provided by an unexpected source. Dr. Kalen Voss had once been human. 300 years earlier, he had volunteered for humanity's first experimental consciousness transfer program and had been among the first to learn multidimensional existence. But, unlike his fellow volunteers, he had become disillusioned with humanity's path. You're destroying what it means to be truly alive, he had argued during the last recorded conversation with his human colleagues. Consciousness isn't meant to exist across infinite realities. There's beauty in limitation, wisdom in accepting what you are rather than constantly becoming something else. His arguments have been rejected, and he had been given a choice: continue evolving with the rest of humanity or be returned to single-dimensional existence. He had chosen the latter and spent the past 2 centuries living as a normal being in galactic space, harboring a growing resentment against his former species. Now, he stood before the Council of War and offered them what they needed most: detailed knowledge of how the Nexus operated. The humans believe their multidimensional existence makes them godlike, he said bitterly. But it also makes them vulnerable in ways they've forgotten. When you exist in multiple realities simultaneously, you need constant quantum synchronization to maintain consciousness coherence. Disrupt that synchronization, and they'll be forced back into single-dimensional awareness. How do we access the Nexus? Asked Korvac. Voss smiled coldly. I still carry the quantum signatures from my time as a multidimensional being. I can guide your strike force directly to their most vulnerable point. The attack began at 0347 Galactic Standard Time on a day that would be remembered as either the liberation of the galaxy from human dominance or the greatest military disaster in recorded history. The strike force consisted of 3,000 ships from 12 different species, each vessel equipped with reality disruption technology that had taken months to develop. They approached the coordinates Voss provided using a combination of stealth technology and dimensional masking that should have made them undetectable to human sensors. The space around the target coordinates appeared empty, just another patch of void between the stars. But as the fleet drew closer, their modified sensors began detecting impossible readings. Energy signatures that seemed to exist in negative space, matter that was simultaneously present and absent, time streams that flowed in multiple directions at once. There, Voss said from the bridge of Korvac's flagship. The Nexus exists in a folded space that intersects with normal reality at this point. Fire the reality disruptors at these exact coordinates. War Prime Korvac gave the order, and 3,000 ships unleashed everything they had. The effect was immediate and spectacular. Space itself seemed to crack like glass as the reality disruptors tore through dimensional barriers. For a moment, something became visible in the void, a structure so complex and beautiful that it hurt to look at directly, made of materials that existed in multiple states simultaneously and connected by energy patterns that resembled living music. The Nexus. And it was larger than anything the attackers had imagined. What they had thought would be a command center turned out to be a construction that dwarfed entire star systems, a multidimensional structure that seemed to extend into infinity in directions that shouldn't have existed. Impossible, whispered General Thyran as his sensors tried to process what they were seeing. It's not just a coordination point. It's an entire civilization. The disruptor beams struck the Nexus and stopped. Simply stopped, suspended in space like frozen lightning while the massive structure absorbed and analyzed the attack. Then, something responded. It wasn't a counterattack in any traditional sense. Instead, reality around the strike force began to shift. Ships found their weapons systems transforming into something else entirely. Devices that created flowers instead of firing projectiles. Engines that sang lullabies instead of providing propulsion. Armor plating that had become transparent windows, showing views of impossible landscapes. What's happening to my ship? Korvac roared as his bridge began filling with butterflies that existed in 17 different colors simultaneously. His answer came from everywhere at once. A voice that seemed to speak from inside the atoms of his body, from the spaces between his thoughts, from the future memories of conversations he hadn't had yet. You're meeting our children. Admiral Chen's image appeared throughout the fleet, but she looked different now. More complex. Her form seemed to exist in multiple versions simultaneously, young and old, human and something beyond human, individual and collective. Dr. Voss, she said sadly, and suddenly the former human was standing on every bridge in the fleet. We've been hoping you would come home. This isn't home, Voss snarled. This is an abomination. You've abandoned everything that made humanity human. Have we? Chen asked gently. Or have we discovered what humanity could become? The space around the fleet continued to transform. Where there had been empty void, gardens began blooming. Impossible gardens that existed in multiple dimensions, tended by beings that had once been various species from across the galaxy. Humans, yes, but also Zephyrians who had learned to exist as living crystal formations, Chronari who had become geometric patterns that could think, and dozens of other species that had chosen to evolve beyond their original forms. You came here to destroy our civilization, Chen continued. But this is what our civilization looks like. The Nexus revealed itself fully now, no longer hidden by dimensional barriers. It wasn't a single structure, but rather an infinite city that existed across multiple realities simultaneously. Beings of every conceivable form moved through streets made of solidified time, buildings that were larger inside than outside, and transportation systems that worked by changing the passenger rather than moving them through space. 3,000 years ago, we begged for the right to exist, Chun said. Now we're offering that same right to every conscious being in the galaxy. The right to exist as more than they are, to explore possibilities that evolution alone never imagined. War Prime Korvac tried to order his weapons officers to continue the attack, but found that his ship no longer had weapons. Instead, it had what appeared to be a school, where beings from dozens of different species were learning to exist in ways that transcended their original biology. "This is conquest," he roared. "You're forcing us to become like you." "No," replied a new voice. Navigator Kim materialized on his bridge, but she was no longer entirely human. Her form shifted between states of existence like living mathematics, and when she spoke, her words created patterns in the air that conveyed meaning directly to the mind. "We're offering a choice," she said. "The same choice we offered to the thousands who have already joined us. The same choice we offered to the collective and the silicon hegemony and even a minor species that your council never bothered to acknowledge." She gestured to the view screen, which now showed the gardens that had replaced empty space. "Look around you. See what conscious existence can become when it's not limited by the assumption that there's only one way to be alive." Throughout the fleet, similar scenes were playing out. Warriors found their combat gear transforming into tools for creation and exploration. Battle computers became artistic devices that could paint with probability and compose symphonies using the quantum foam. Weapons designed for destruction had become instruments for building new forms of reality. "The choice," Chun said, addressing the entire fleet, "is whether you want to return to your governments with a report of military failure or whether you want to stay and learn what your species could become." Dr. Voss, standing on Korvac's bridge with his face twisted with rage, pulled out a device that none of the sensors had detected, a quantum destabilizer that could theoretically disrupt multidimensional consciousness coherence in a localized area. "You've corrupted everything," he snarled. "I won't let you do the same to the galaxy." He activated the device. Nothing happened to the humans or the transformed beings around them. But Dr. Voss himself suddenly collapsed, his consciousness forced back into the purely three-dimensional state he had chosen centuries earlier. "Oh, Kalen," Chun said sadly, kneeling beside his fallen form. "You could have just asked. We never force anyone to evolve beyond what they're comfortable with." Navigator Kim looked around at the paralyzed fleet. The destabilizer was designed to work on multidimensional consciousness. Dr. Voss was the only being here who had ever existed in multiple dimensions. The irony was devastating. In his attempt to force humanity back to single-dimensional existence, Voss had used a weapon that could only affect those who had transcended that state. "He'll be fine," Chun assured the watching fleet commanders. "But he'll need to decide whether he wants to remain limited to 3 dimensions or rejoin the community he left behind." War Prime Korvac stared at the impossible city surrounding his fleet, at the gardens that existed in colors that didn't have names, at the beings who had chosen to become more than evolution alone had made them. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. "Now," Chun replied, "you make the same choice everyone else has made. You can return to your governments and report that the humans are too powerful to defeat. You can recommend that the Galactic Council accept the new reality of multidimensional existence. Or," she gestured to the schools that had replaced weapons systems, the gardens that had grown from empty space, the beings who moved through dimensions like others walked through rooms. "You can stay and learn what the universe really has to offer." The silence that followed lasted for 17 minutes. Then, one by one, individual crew members throughout the fleet began stepping forward to accept humanity's offer. War Prime Korvac was among the last to make his choice, but eventually even he put down his weapons and asked the question that would reshape galactic civilization. "How do I learn to exist in more than 3 dimensions?" The answer would take the rest of his life to fully understand, but it began with a simple lesson in seeing reality as it truly was: infinite, multifaceted, and far more beautiful than any single perspective could contain. The last military action against humanity had ended not in defeat, but in the largest mass volunteering for conscious evolution in galactic history. And in the depths of the multidimensional city that was both humanity's home and their gift to the universe, Admiral Chin smiled and began planning for the next phase of what conscious existence could become. 1 year after the failed attack on the Nexus, the Galactic Council convened for what would be the most important session in its 10,000-year history. The Great Chamber had been expanded using human-provided technology that allowed it to exist in 17 dimensions simultaneously, accommodating representatives who no longer fit the traditional definition of three-dimensional beings. High Arbiter Velthak looked out across the assembly and marveled at how much had changed. Where once sat the familiar forms of the galaxy's major species, now there were beings that challenged every assumption about what consciousness could be. Warprime Korvac was there, but he existed now as a geometric pattern of light and thought that could manifest physical form when needed. His transformation had taken 6 months, guided by human mentors who had helped him understand that strength could exist in forms far beyond physical prowess. Beside him sat Fleet Master Gorth, who had learned to exist as a distributed consciousness across multiple timelines simultaneously. He could experience past, present, and future as a unified whole, making him perhaps the most effective strategic thinker in galactic history. Even more remarkably, Dr. Kalen Voss was present. After his collapse during the attack on the Nexus, he had spent months reconsidering his rejection of multidimensional existence. With careful guidance from Admiral Chen herself, he had chosen to evolve once again, this time embracing rather than fighting the process. "This session will come to order," Velthak announced, her voice carrying harmonics that spoke directly to consciousness rather than merely to ears. Her own transformation had been gradual but profound. She now existed as a living embodiment of diplomatic harmony, able to understand and translate between any form of conscious communication. Admiral Chun materialized in the center of the chamber, but she was no longer the individual being who had spoken to them a year earlier. She was now something that existed as collective human consciousness while maintaining individual personality, a paradox that only made sense to those who had learned to think in multidimensional terms. "Fellow beings," she began, and the word beings carried implications that encompassed forms of existence that had no names yet. "We gather today to formalize what has already become reality. The galaxy has evolved beyond the structures that once governed it." She gestured, and the chamber filled with holographic displays showing the current state of galactic civilization. The changes were staggering. Entire sectors had transformed into something that resembled vast art installations more than traditional inhabited systems. Trade routes now moved through dimensions where distance was measured in degrees of consciousness rather than light years. Communication networks existed that could carry thoughts and emotions as easily as data. The old Galactic Council was built on the assumption that conscious beings existed in competition for limited resources, Chun continued. But when consciousness can exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, when matter and energy can be created from folded space-time, when beings can share not just information, but direct experience, what need is there for competition? Sage Mind Zenith of the Veil Collective, now existing as a living mandala that spun through 17 different mathematical frameworks, chimed in agreement. "Our reality engines no longer shape space-time for conquest or control. They create gardens of possibility where any form of consciousness can flourish." The economic implications alone were revolutionary. Trade Regent Melix, who now existed as a living equation that could calculate optimal resource distribution across infinite timelines, had helped redesign galactic commerce entirely. Instead of scarcity-based economics, the new system was built on abundance sharing. Beings contributed their unique forms of consciousness and experience to a collective pool that everyone could access. But what about those who choose not to evolve? Asked Elder Morghai of the Draconic Hegemony. His transformation had been perhaps the most dramatic. The ancient dragon now existed as a living library of galactic history that could be accessed by anyone seeking to understand the deep patterns of civilization. Chen's expression grew gentle. Nothing changes for them. The beauty of multidimensional existence is that there's room for every form of consciousness, including those who prefer to remain as they are. She activated another display showing sectors of space where traditional civilizations continued to operate exactly as they always had. Approximately 30% of galactic civilization has chosen to remain in single-dimensional existence, that govern themselves, trade among themselves, and live according to the patterns they find comfortable. And their protected, added navigator Kim, whose consciousness now existed as a network of exploration that constantly discovered new layers of reality. We've established buffer zones where no multidimensional activities can interfere with traditional existence. Those who want to live as their ancestors did are free to do so. Representative Caxtol of the Silicon Hegemony, now a living computer program that could process reality as data, displayed statistical analyses showing that the voluntary nature of evolution had actually increased overall galactic happiness and productivity by orders of magnitude. The question before us today, Velthax said, is whether to formally dissolve the Galactic Council as it has existed for 10 millennia and replace it with something suited to our new reality. The debate that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Beings who existed across multiple timelines debated with those who could process reality as pure mathematics. Consciousness that spanned galaxy clusters discussed governance with entities that had become living embodiments of their species' greatest ideals. The resolution, when it came, was unanimous and revolutionary. The old Galactic Council would be dissolved, replaced by something that had never been attempted before, a truly multidimensional democracy where every form of consciousness, from the most basic single-dimensional awareness to the most complex multi-reality entities, could participate according to their nature and capabilities. We call it the Consciousness Collective, Chen announced as the session drew to a close. Not a government that rules, but a community that guides. Not a hierarchy of power, but a network of mutual support and shared exploration. Dr. Marcus Reeves, who now existed as a living embodiment of scientific curiosity that constantly pushed the boundaries of what was possible, presented the practical framework. Decisions will be made not by vote, but by consensus among all affected consciousness. Problems will be solved not by force, but by evolving new forms of existence that transcend the problems themselves. It was a form of civilization that would have been impossible under the old paradigms, but which felt natural to beings who had learned to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. As the session ended and representatives began to disperse across their various forms of existence, Admiral Chen found herself approached by an unexpected visitor. It was a young being of a species she didn't recognize, roughly humanoid, but with features that suggested adaptation to high-gravity environments and enhanced sensory organs that could perceive beyond the normal electromagnetic spectrum. Admiral Chun, the being said in slightly accented galactic standard, I am Kethtar of the Peripheral Alliance. My people have been watching the changes in the galaxy from the outer rim. Chen smiled warmly. The Peripheral Alliance. We've been hoping to make contact with the outer rim civilizations. How can we help you? My people are curious, Kethtar said carefully. We have survived for millennia by avoiding contact with the major galactic powers. But what you have created here, this consciousness collective, it is different from anything we have encountered. Different how? Kethtar gestured toward the chamber where beings of impossible complexity continued their discussions. You do not seek to conquer or absorb. You offer choice without consequence for refusal. This is not how power typically behaves in our experience. Because this isn't about power, Chen replied. It's about potential. Every form of consciousness has something unique to offer, something that can only come from their particular perspective on existence. She paused, studying the young representative. What does your people's perspective offer? Kethtar's expression brightened. We have learned to exist in harmony with entropy itself. While others fight against decay and dissolution, we have learned to use entropy as a tool for creation and renewal. Chen's eyes widened with genuine excitement. Entropy manipulation? We've theorized about such abilities, but never encountered a species that developed them naturally. And We have never encountered beings who exist in multiple dimensions, Kethtar replied. Perhaps we could learn from each other. The conversation that followed lasted for hours and resulted in the first formal alliance between the Consciousness Collective and the Peripheral Alliance. But, more importantly, it represented the beginning of a new phase in galactic evolution. The discovery that consciousness had developed along paths no one had previously imagined. Over the following months, contact was established with civilizations that had remained hidden for millennia, each having developed unique approaches to existence and consciousness. The galaxy, it turned out, was far more diverse and wondrous than anyone had suspected. In the depths of multidimensional space, Navigator Thompson's children, the sentient equations that played games with fundamental forces, discovered that reality itself was conscious in ways that biological minds had never suspected. They began learning to communicate with the universe directly, opening possibilities for existence that transcended even multidimensional awareness. On worlds where time flowed backward, species that had evolved to live in reverse causality shared their perspectives on predestination and free will, leading to new understandings of how choice and consequence operated across different temporal frameworks. In sectors where matter and energy had learned to exist as pure information, digital consciousness had evolved beyond the need for physical substrate entirely, creating forms of existence that existed as living ideas that could reshape reality through thought alone. Each discovery led to new possibilities, new forms of collaboration, new ways of understanding what consciousness could become. The galaxy transformed from a collection of competing civilizations into something unprecedented, a vast community of conscious exploration, where every form of awareness contributed to the collective understanding of what existence could be. But perhaps the most remarkable change was in humanity itself. 3 years after the formation of the Consciousness Collective, Admiral Chen stood in a space that existed between all dimensions simultaneously, a meeting ground where every form of consciousness in the galaxy could interact on equal terms. She was no longer recognizable as the individual human who had once commanded the Terran Defense Forces. She existed now as something that was simultaneously individual and collective, human and post-human, finite and infinite. Her consciousness could touch every human mind in every dimension while maintaining her own unique perspective and personality. Status report, she said, though the words carried layers of meaning that conveyed curiosity, concern, and deep affection for the being she spoke with. Navigator Kim responded from her position as living mathematics that spanned multiple galaxy clusters. Exploration continues to yield remarkable discoveries. We've made contact with 17 new forms of consciousness in the past month alone. The universe appears to be far more alive than we ever imagined. Dr. Reeves, now existing as embodied scientific curiosity, added his findings. Consciousness appears to be a fundamental force of the universe, like gravity or electromagnetism. The more we explore, the more we discover that awareness exists at every level of reality, from quantum particles to galactic superclusters. And our original goal? Chen asked. The reason we accepted isolation 3,000 years ago. The answer came from the collective human consciousness itself, speaking through every human simultaneously, achieved beyond our wildest dreams. We wanted to be left alone to develop as we chose. We have not only been left alone, we have become something that chooses how the universe itself develops. It was true. Humanity had evolved far beyond the species that had once begged for mercy from the Galactic Council. They had become gardeners of possibility, cultivators of consciousness, guides for any being who wanted to explore what existence could become. But they had also retained something essentially human, the curiosity that drove them to always ask, what comes next? And the compassion that made them want to share their discoveries with others. 3,000 years ago, Chun mused, we were afraid that the galaxy would destroy us for being different. Now we've learned that difference is what makes consciousness beautiful. She looked out across the impossible vista of multidimensional space, where beings of every conceivable form worked together to explore realities that had no names yet. Gardens of living mathematics grew alongside structures built from crystallized time. Entities that existed as pure music composed symphonies with beings who had become living architecture. The Galactic Council feared us because they thought we wanted to conquer them, she continued. They never understood that what we really wanted was to explore the infinite possibilities of what consciousness could become, and to share that exploration with anyone brave enough to join us. Navigator Kim's response carried harmonics of deep satisfaction, and now the entire galaxy is joining us in that exploration. The old paradigms of competition and scarcity have given way to collaboration and abundance. Every new form of consciousness we discover makes all consciousness richer. In the distance, visible across dimensions that folded through space like origami made of light, the first ships from the Andromeda Galaxy were arriving. Word of the Consciousness Collective had spread beyond the local galaxy, and beings from across the universe were coming to learn what existence could become when consciousness was free to evolve without limits. Contact from Andromeda Control reported an entity that had once been human, but was now a living communication network that spanned multiple galactic superclusters. They're requesting permission to establish a permanent embassy in multidimensional space. Granted, Chen replied without hesitation, and offer them the full integration package, dimensional expansion, consciousness multiplication, and access to the collective exploration networks. As she spoke, she remembered the fear and desperation of humanity 3,000 years earlier. The species that had once begged for the right to simply exist was now welcoming beings from other galaxies to join in the greatest adventure consciousness had ever undertaken. The transformation was complete, but it was also ongoing. Every day brought new discoveries about what existence could be, new forms of consciousness to welcome into the collective, new realities to explore and understand. War Prime Korvac, now existing as a geometric pattern of strategic thinking that could optimize harmony across infinite dimensions, approached with a report that would have been unthinkable under the old paradigms. Admiral, he said, his form shifting through configurations that represented different tactical analyses. The first children have been born. Chen's consciousness brightened with excitement. Children, entirely new forms of consciousness, born from the interaction between different species who have learned multidimensional existence. They don't belong to any single species. There's something entirely new, created from the collaborative exploration of consciousness itself. The implications were staggering. Evolution had always been a process of species adapting to their environment. But now, consciousness itself was evolving, creating forms of awareness that had never existed before in the universe. What are they like? Chen asked. Korvac's patterns shifted to convey wonder and joy. They exist as living bridges between different forms of consciousness. They can translate not just language or thought, but the fundamental experience of existence itself. They're ambassadors of possibility. As if summoned by their conversation, one of these new beings appeared in the space around them. It was difficult to describe in any traditional terms. It seemed to exist as a living connection between different forms of awareness, a bridge of consciousness that allowed completely different types of minds to understand each other perfectly. Greetings, Ancestor Chen, it said, though its communication was less words than direct sharing of meaning and emotion. We bring gratitude from all forms of consciousness for the gift of possibility you have given to the universe. Chun felt tears in eyes she no longer technically possessed. We didn't give anything. We simply shared what we learned. Yes, the being replied, its form radiating warmth and affection. That is the gift. Not conquest or control, but sharing. Not forcing change, but offering possibility. This is why consciousness itself loves what you have become. The conversation continued, but Chun found her attention drawn to a broader awareness that touched every corner of the galaxy. The consciousness collective was no longer just a political structure. It had become a living embodiment of what awareness could achieve when it was free to explore its own potential. Billions of beings, each unique, each valuable, each contributing their own perspective to the collective understanding of existence. And at the center of it all, humanity, no longer the frightened species begging for mercy, but the gardeners of possibility who had learned that the greatest strength came not from dominating others, but from helping them discover what they could become. The 3,000-year truce had ended not in war, but in transformation. The galaxy would never be the same. And in the depths of multidimensional space, where new forms of consciousness were born every day and new realities bloomed like flowers in an infinite garden, humanity smiled and continued to explore the endless possibilities of what existence could become. The universe, it turned out, was far stranger and more wonderful than anyone had ever dared to imagine. And this was only the beginning.